Well, we're picking up our story sort of where we left it off last Tuesday. This is Kano's Castle in Antonito, Colorado.
Oh, what an attraction. It reminds me of Chief Rolling Thunder in Imlay, Nevada.
Yeah, really similar. Here's a link to our shows on that. But this is a structure I think I find more interesting.
I like this one too.
This is the original Antonito train station, and it's not being used anymore. But this is the original Rio Grande train station here. And I think the reason that the Cumbres and Toltec never has used it is when the narrow gauge got torn out, when the third rail got torn out, well, you can't get a narrow gauge train up here anymore.
Won't make it.
In spite of the fact that it's maybe 300 or 400 yards away.
Yes.
I'd like to see them relay the third rail up to here. But if we ask Professor Google, here's the shops of the Cumbres and Toltec right here. Here's the original main line. And if we just follow the original standard gauge main line, there's the depot.
Well, not that far.
Not far at all. I mean, you can walk up there.
Right.
But it just isn't being used anymore.
Somebody's spending a lot of money to fix this up.
Yeah, I'd like to know exactly who has spent money. It's partially restored. It's mostly, been fixed up quite a bit. There's a lot of other buildings around town here that need fixing up.
Right, but they're still interesting.
Oh, they're really interesting. And then this is the main line out of town up toward Alamosa. We kind of looked at that last Tuesday. Of real interest, I think, is that you can see where the third rail for the dual gauging used to be.
You sure can.
You can see it in many places, and some of the road crossings are still laid in dual gauge. But I find that really fascinating. I'd like to see the third rail put back in.
Yes.
And see steam trains going all the way up to Alamosa. That'd be really neat. Now, there's a couple of celebrities that grew up along this line.
Oh, my.
First and foremost, Jack Dempsey.
There he is.
And we had that one show where we kind of ran into his family living in his house in Salt Lake. But this is a recreation of the house he grew up in Manassa, which is just up the line from Antonito. Jack Dempsey, of course, was one of the most important heavyweight champion boxers of the world.
Right.
And this was his birthplace. Now, this is the other celebrity home here along the line. This is the birthplace of Indiana Jones.
Oh, really?
And his father. Now, his father was a spy. Agent 007, Bond, James Bond. But if you've seen the movie The Last Crusade, this will make a certain amount of sense because River Phoenix, who plays the young Indiana Jones, has to chase down this circus train because he has a notion to steal something that's on the circus train, which is an ancient cross. And anyway, dressed as a Boy Scout, River Phoenix chases down the narrow gauge train. And did you know the locomotive engineer here is Earl Knoob?
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can see him in at least one of the shots. Anyway, after River Phoenix steals the cross, he has to outrun all these guys who have it in for him. And, he runs into his home.
Oh.
And what you can't see in the shot here is just barely out of frame to the left here is Mike Niederhauser, myself, and Earl Knoob.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, the house is still there. Looks just like it did when they shot the movie.
It sure does.
And just one of those fun little attractions along the narrow gauge here. Right in Antonito, as it turns out. Now, we mentioned before that this is the train station in Lahara. Here again, it's all fixed up.
I like that one.
And boy, that's a pretty train station. I assume that the locals here are the ones who fixed it up, but there's probably some story there.
Right.
Just don't know what that story is. But there's some operating industries in and around here that keep this railroad functional.
Right.
And every week or two, a train comes down here and switches out these various grain elevators and industries and so on. So they're taking trains all the way down to Antonito, and the Y there at Antonito is still being used to turn trains and whatnot. So it's an active line.
Right.
But a little looking around, you find all kinds of fun artifacts.
Oh, I know. This reminds me when I was a kid growing up, what would be in the neighbors' yards.
Yeah, the tough shed here is really tough. But how fun it is to see this old original standard gauge equipment
Right.
just being repurposed on people's farms and around their houses. Just really neat to see. Now, the real hub of activity back when this was the steam railroad and the narrow gauge and the dual gauge railroad was Alamosa.
Right.
And Alamosa is a real live, honest to goodness, pleasant town. And this is where we were staying.
Right.
Because it's not that far from Antonito.
Nope.
And as we showed last week, the train station has been repurposed to some extent as a museum. Anyway, a lot of the stuff that's around the train station here is stuff that was around the train station back when it was being used by the Denver and Rio Grande. They still have the scheduling board here, the train order board.
Isn't that neat?
And it's for both narrow gauge and standard gauge. That's just so cool to see. But what we talked a little bit about last time is until very recently, this train station was being used.
Right.
And it was being used by the Rio Grande Scenic Railroad. You can see one of their trains parked right here.
Right.
And they were using a lot of this line, and in fact, they were running trains all the way down to Antonito. And I'm sort of wondering if they had anything to do with fixing up the train stations. Maybe. But there's some great equipment around here. It's just a shame it isn't running. They were using a lot of F units. Look at this beautiful F unit.
That is neat.
Wow, and there it just sits, not doing anything. There's a lot of talk about reopening the line. But as we looked at this place, they had a ton of passenger equipment. They had perhaps half a dozen of those F units and a whole bunch of other units, and they bought a lot of rolling stock that they hadn't fixed up yet.
Right.
That's just kind of sitting here bleaching in the sun. But as it's mostly private property, rather than wander around and get arrested, we used Professor Google.
Right, he's safe.
He's safe to explore. We saw some F units parked there that aren't being used. This is the original Y. And there's this extra shop building right over here. And look.
What is that?
It's a steam locomotive.
What?
So, well, there's a public road. It's a dirt road, but it enabled us to get back here and see what the heck. And definitely this falls into the category of what the heck.
What is that?
This is called a cooker, a steam cooker, a fireless locomotive.
Oh, before the hot air fryers.
Before the same idea, actually closer to a thermos bottle.
Okay.
So instead of having a boiler, it just has a vessel laying on its side. You fill it right to the top with scalding water. If it's coming from a high pressure boiler, that water can be up to maybe 400 degrees.
Oof.
And so as you open the throttle to let steam into the cylinders, that causes the pressure in the boiler to drop. That causes the boiling point to drop. That causes the water inside the boiler to boil, providing more steam to the wheels, and so on and so on and so on. And apparently you can drive one of these things around all day. They were used anywhere there were flammables around.
Well, that makes sense.
And this is the site of an oil refinery, so maybe, I don't know. But anyway, the railroad also operated trains over Veta Pass.
Right.
And this is, again, Professor Google showing us the route up there. And here's one of their trains parked up at the top of Veta Pass. But they ran a scenic railroad up here, and oh my gosh, it would have been fun if we could have gotten up here when they were running this thing. And look at that, they were running steam.
Yes.
Now this is one of my favorite steam locomotives of all time, Southern Pacific 1744. They used to run on the Heber Creeper, and they had that in operation for about a year. But this was their main steam engine, number 18. And it actually came down from the Lake Superior and something railroad. But they repainted it as Rio Grande number 18. It never was a Rio Grande engine. But they mostly ran diesels up over Veta Pass. But for certain excursions, they ran the steam up here. And wouldn't that have been fun to see? Anyway, both steam engines have been sold and are no longer here, but wouldn't it be great if they can reopen this railroad?
Oh, I would love to go on a ride on this one.
Well, let's plan on it. Get the railroad open.
Yes, we want to ride it.
In the meantime, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, and you can do that by clicking on the blue button right there.
There it is.
Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we also hope you subscribe so you can follow along with the rest of the story.
Yes.
We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.